This afternoon, I will be your host as we briefly discuss the topic of beginnings in this Transformation of Self series. My name is Alex TD, and this is a look on the surface. If you're interested in my personal beginnings, I would recommend watching my community spotlight video that was done earlier this year. That video can be found on the Authority Establishment YouTube channel. Take a look if that's what you're interested in. However, at this time, we'll be taking a look at the topic of beginnings. How does it relate to personal transformation? We'll begin by addressing the question, what are they? Beginnings implies something new. It implies that there was a sort of nothing, and then there becomes a moment where there is a need for something. It's the very natural next step to the previous nothing. How are we to recognize these beginnings? What do they look like? Well, it's a very complex question to answer. When you go from nothing to something, all sorts of possibilities could fill in that gap. It's much like an empty container being filled with water or liquid of some kind. The gravity of potentials is astronomical, beyond the typical comprehension of the human mind. How could we fathom the endless possibilities when we can hardly even count the stars in the sky beyond our own solar system even, within our own solar system even? It's a big question. Hopefully, as we continue through this series, we'll discover some answers. Next, let's take a look at how they come about. Now, if we think about a simple example such as a storybook, we know that they come about when there should be at the end of something. Okay? But as we've mentioned before, the beginning is some kind of realization. A realization that there is a nothing. A realization that perhaps something could fill the void from which that nothing once was. A realization that a choice must be made. And irregardless of where we sit, stand, or lie, as we mentioned before, there are as many choices as there are stars in the sky. So again, how do these beginnings come about? Well, it could be as simple as waking up in the morning. You've woken up in the morning and you realize that before, when your eyes were closed and your consciousness was down, there was nothing. And when you opened your eyes and you saw the light, then there was something. Many of the somethings after opening your eyes have been put there before. They're familiar to you. However, there continues to be an astronomical number of choices, moment to moment, microsecond to microsecond. Consciously, it is unfathomable how many choices we have at any one given moment. An interesting experiment would be to divide up this screen with, say, 2, 10, 100 variations of myself speaking to you now. And while the words being spoken may be exactly the same, my gestures, my mannerisms, my behavior physically would be different in each one of those screens. This is much like a parallel universe idea, if you will. And after a few phrases or so, condense them all back to one. And that is the conscious life that you see and hear and sense and feel and observe moment to moment. It's a remarkable thing, really. Just how much is available to us at any given point in time. And yet, some way, somehow, it all manages to condense down to who I am sitting here speaking to who you are listening and watching right now. If that's not remarkable, I don't know what is. So when, then, should we look for these beginnings? Well, as a conceptual starting place, if you will, we can look for beginnings when we have reached an end. When we have reached the end of sleep, we are beginning our daily waking life. When we have reached the end of this stream, I will return to my work on my projects, and you will return and begin whatever next activity is next on your plate for you. The interesting thing about the timing of beginnings is that oftentimes anxiety is produced. This is a caution to not jump too far ahead. You see, we as individuals have had so many beginnings each day, each hour, each season, each child that we've brought into the world, each family member that we have seen leave. each story that we have watched or read. We know the beginnings that we have experienced up to this point. We remember those things. Not just here, that's where the details are. But here, we remember each and every beginning that we have been to. And we remember, oftentimes, what the end was like. More often than not, many of us have experienced traumatic endings. And this has created a sequence of negative past experiences. And while, yes, unfortunately, this trauma, these bad experiences, unfortunately, is normal in a relatively, generalistically speaking, dysfunctional society, that does not take away what we mentioned before, the choices that are always available to us. So while, yes, they may be similar and at times helpful, the past experiences that we've had and the traumas that have shaped our lives, it is important to not take that out of context when we reach new situations, when we have new beginnings. This deterministic loop that many of us get caught in is what many know as living on autopilot, perhaps. And we're making and living by the same decisions that have happened to us before. It is up to each and every one of us to pause the two lines. Pause. There's a space between the past and the future. It is up to us to reclaim our bodies and our minds, oftentimes with breath, can be a very helpful technique to reclaim ourselves, to create that pause, that space in between the past and the future. And from that space, we choose based on what we know to be helpful, disregarding that which is no longer helping or is now harming us even. And accessing the astronomical options that we've talked about before. And from that place, making a choice. Exercising, as human beings, our free will to continue forward. At this time, in this topic of beginnings, bringing this information to you is the greatest gift that I can think of to do with the time that we have. With that being said, that'll be all for now. I thank you for your time. My name is Alex TD, and this has been a look on the surface.